Well, now it is time for the Morning Buzz, and we have John Wood Jr. here, and we're talking about the showdown with Netanyahu this week over the Iran nuclear deal. You know, it was major news. A lot of people were waiting for this speech to happen. And I just felt like it was the wrong thing to do because we are basically showing a divided house. And as a foreign policy rule, you know, we can disagree at home all we want, but we should have a united front. I mean, that's the first rule of parenting, right?
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. No, you know, I think there's an argument to be made that the two houses, you know, the Speaker and the President, should have been in communication before Netanyahu came. You know, I think there's an argument to be made for that. At the same time, you know, Israel is our great ally in the Middle East, and you could argue globally. And I thought it was a little petty that you had so many lawmakers ultimately opt to boycott the speech, given the fact that he was there to talk about such an important issue. No, I think that ultimately, I mean, you talk about showing a united front, right? We have to show united front within our own government. That's why I said they should have communicated, but also with our allies. And it doesn't really make sense, I think, to pull the rug out from under that by not being there simply to welcome such an important figure when he comes to town, even if there is some internal political division.
The fact of the matter is we've never had a divided front on Israel. It's been a bipartisan support for them. Right. So why divide it now? And especially when we are trying to accomplish something. You know, Netanyahu's been, making these claims about Iran and Iraq for a decade, basically.
Well, Netanyahu did make the point that we do have bipartisan support for Israel as a general. And I thought that, and appropriately so, I thought that he was very generous in acknowledging the good things that Barack Obama has done.
Then he proceeded to slap him in the face, basically.
Well, he proceeded to basically indicate. There is something there with that relationship, it seems. But again, he was very generous to the president. I think he meant the good things he said. But he proceeded to articulate the fact that he's not entirely comfortable with the deal that seems to be in formation. And if that's the case, it is important that the United States of America be aware of that and have the point of view of the Israeli Prime Minister.
This is the same guy who addressed Congress and said that.
I know, but I think we could talk about this. We could debate about this all for hours. I think if you could come back.
Well, we have one more story where we're going to be talking about Ferguson. They just released, despite not filing charges against Officer Darren Wilson in the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Attorney General Eric Holder released a scathing Department of Justice report highlighting widespread discrimination within the police department. And we had this situation similarly right here in Pasadena. There was an article talking about 90% of minorities pulled over from police were minorities right here locally. And what do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there are a couple of things that happen that are mutually reinforcing in a negative way. On the one hand, and I say this, of course, as an African American myself, a person who lives in the inner city, and a person who's, I think, pretty familiar with the circumstances there. And of course, in Pasadena, not the inner city community, but you have a lot of kids who are bussed out from my neighborhood. Because of crime, because ultimately, I think, because of lackluster economic environment, lackluster educational environment, you have circumstances conducive to higher rates of crime. But because you have higher rates of crime, I think it also predisposes a lot of police officers to be a little bit prejudiced in terms of the way they approach enforcement law. So it's something that we need to tackle, I think, from a number of different levels.
They're not used to growing up. They're used to growing up in their neighborhood in a certain way
there's
too,
a certain.
And they need to probably have better exposure.
Yeah, there's a certain bit of cultural or environmental sort of dislocation that happens, which may be a factor. But we certainly need to look at both police reforms, how we can sort of more effectively get the police to, I think, engage with minority communities and so forth, but also look at the structural issues that lead to higher crime rates.
Well, right here locally, we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of Kendrec McDade, the shooting that gained some national attention, and we're still waiting for the internal investigation report to be released, which is troubling. But I do think you're not going to have the widespread unrest that you saw in Ferguson as here, because I don't think Chief Sanchez is going to look the other way when there are racial jokes being put out there that we saw in that Ferguson report. And I think that's where the policing and the top-down structure really needs to.
Well, any time you identify a culture of prejudice within any institution, That's something that needs to be reformed and tackled, whether it's
Exactly.
Ferguson or Pasadena. I'm not making that accusation about Pasadena, but just as a general rule, that's something we need to be, I think, rather firm on. In the case of Pasadena,
Well, you know what? I agree
No,
with
no,
you,
no.
but I think there's so much to say about this. We really do want
We
to
don't
have
have
you
all-
back, and really for sure have you back.
No, absolutely.
And discuss this a little further.
I'm
Thanks.
happy to come back anytime.
Thanks for that, John.
Thank you, guys.
Well, she's the 6th president of Cal Poly Pomona and the school's first African American female.
Dr. Soraya Coley joins us next live in the studio.